So welcome to the quality breakout session. So next year I'd be involved in the construction industry for 40 years, one way or another, and the problem of quality, or more rather the problem of poor quality, been a fundamental issue that's dogged the construction industry for my entire career. Sometimes it seems to slip down the agenda a little bit, we kind of heard this morning, but it always tends to resurface. Recent years we've seen some very significant quality issues in the UK, as we heard mention of this morning, Grenfell Fire and Scottish schools, etc. We in Ireland also had our fair share of quality failures, and to make that very clear, you'd only have to look at the Irish Times from yesterday. So with apartment owners left with bills of 11,000 to fix defects, and with a whole inside page spread pointing out defective construction work, so obviously not where our industry needs to be. Also struck by a comment Pat Lucy made about the similarities between the UK and Ireland and what we could learn from each other. So we've got two speakers from the UK in this set and one speaker from Ireland to give different perspectives. So the first speaker is Chris Blythe, OBE. So Chris is the Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute of Buildings, and has been so for around 20 years. As a CIOB member myself for around 30 years, I can testify Chris has been an excellent leader of our very large and geographically spread organisation. So I wish to congratulate Chris on his OBE, which he received for services to the construction industry in 2017. Chris is also going to retire shortly, so in 9 weeks' time. So this is one of his last travelling gigs. So we'd like to extend our very best wishes to Chris for a long and prosperous retirement. Over the years, Chris has regularly addressed concerns about quality in Construction Management magazine, many international conferences. I think one of the things he's pushed is the need for a cultural change as a prerequisite for improvement in the industry. So following several high-profile failures in the UK, the CIOB established a quality commission under past President Paul Nash. Commission sought to address some of the issues of our chronic quality problems. Chris will give us an overview of some of the reasons behind poor quality and hopefully some of the potential solutions identified by the Quality Commission. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Martin. Great pleasure to be here at GMIT again. And as Martin said, this is probably going to be my last visit because in 9 weeks or so I retire from the CIOB. But I have to say, the last 19 years has been a real privilege, and having the opportunity to come to venues like this in many places around the world is what makes the job so worthwhile. Now, I'm going to be talking about the Quality Commission that the Institute set up some time ago. But the title of this presentation is around Quality Matters. And why does it matter? Well, it's actually a very simple human thing. And in this day and age where you can go out and get anything and it works right first time for as long as you want, then there are real issues there about translating that to our industry and how we can emulate what happens in other walks of our life. And the construction industry has a very simple job. It's, with all due respect to previous speakers about infrastructure and national development plans of all of that, the reason we build is to make people's lives better. You know, whether it's a house, whether it's schools, whether it's colleges, whether it's other places of work or places where we play, what have you, or whether it's hospitals, our job is to make people's lives better. And if we don't make people's lives better, then we fail. But what's also crucial in that is that it's not only the lives of people who use our buildings we're looking to make better, it's also the lives of people who build for us, and that's you. So unless we can make sure that the people who build have a good quality of life in our industry, they're not going to be able to deliver the quality of output that we desperately need, which will make the lives of millions of people you'll never ever know better as well. And whether that's for simple things like, you know, fresh drinking water in some parts of the world, or advanced transport systems in others. So that's really what this is all about. But to actually make the points, we go back to some pretty simple basics. So, if you like, I'll start off with here. This headline was referring to the report by Professor John Cole into the defects that led to the closure of 17 schools in Edinburgh following the collapse of a wall at Oxgang School. Now, the report identified multiple defects in all 17 schools that were procured under the same PPP arrangements, and actually led to an investigation that identified similar defects in, would you believe, a further 72 schools, and as recently last year, 19 other government buildings in Scotland. But I think the most sobering part of this particular quotation, or the note here, that comes from Professor Cole's report, was the question of it was a matter of luck and timing. Because this wall fell down at about 4:30 in the morning and not at 8:30 in the morning, it's the difference between no kids being hurt or killed and 20 or 30 children being seriously hurt. And you can imagine what would have happened if children had been killed. Now the issue is the same, and you wouldn't. But the way politics works, and it's probably the same here in Ireland, is that if 22 people have been killed, the course of action would have been very different to just doing a report like this. Here's another one that gets our attention. This came up in the same month as Professor Cole's report with Bovis. And, I'm going to call out names, and I'm sorry and apologise if I offend anybody for that, but sometimes you have to actually say and identify where things aren't right. Setting aside £7 million to compensate buyers of new homes. And what they've been doing here is persuading people to complete on their house purchases, knowing that they weren't complete, and what they were going to then do is go back in and try and put right what they'd done. Because the driver of this was actually meeting year-end targets. It wasn't actually about building good quality homes, it was actually meeting year-end targets, so some of the executives could get their bonuses. Our production process not being sufficiently robust in order to deliver the quality of homes, just rushing stuff out the door. And here we have a YouGov survey. More than half of new build homes in England have major faults, March 2017. And here we have the report emphasises the impact on families. When we get it wrong, it really does make a difference to people's lives. And I've had people ringing me up at the Chartered Institute of Building asking whether we can intercede with building companies, what have you. And by that stage, people are actually in a terrible state, and mental health has deteriorated. The impact on family life has changed because, Dad, for example, who should have got this right or was leading on this move of house, is now in a position where they can't get anywhere with the builder, can't get any restitution, it's not covered by guarantees, and family life takes a big hit. And there have been cases of people taking their own life as a result of this. At the same time, we've got firms, which are paying bonuses. For example, Persimmon, directors of Persimmon this last year have cleared £200 million of bonuses. But they're making a promise to, improve the quality of their homes in coming years. And the same applies to people like Barratt and Taylor Wimpey. I did say I would start to call people out. And then we have Lakenhall House. Tyre buck fly deaths could have been prevented. 2013. This was an inquiry that took place into a fire that took place in July 2009, in which 6 people tragically lost their lives. 6 people. And when you wind the clock forward to 2017, you get this. Now, I remember waking up on that morning, switching on the television, and it was absolute sense of horror that our industry could have actually created a situation like this. Seeing that building burning as it did, how it did, But can we learn any lessons? Certainly we didn't learn any lessons from Lakehall House, and this building was newly refurbished in 2015. So what happened was we had the Hackett report, and she identified a number of key issues. Devastatingly, people didn't really know what the regulations were. A sense of indifference. It was almost as though what we were trying to do in building a safe house for someone, or safe building for people to live in, wasn't really the primary aim. The aim was actually a development project and delivering it as we could. Lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities. Ambiguity about who was in charge, where the responsibility lied. Was it the owners of the building? Was it the designers of the building? Was it the contractor of the building? Is it the operators of the building? And an inadequate regulatory oversight and enforcement tools. What we had did not work. And the size and complexity of projects sometimes can overwhelm our tools to actually make sure these projects are right. And also when enforcement is required, it's not often being done well or properly, because sometimes the cost of enforcement for the enforcers can be overtaken by the value of what you're trying to do. And some of these developers can tie people like building control up for years, because back in the UK, building control has to fund its own enforcement. You can't just go to court, they have to pay for it. And therefore, there is sometimes a big disincentive to actually go through the enforcement regime. And at the end of the day, Dame Judith Hackett, who produced this, talked about the cultural issues, and Martin mentioned that, the cultural issues. And we have a race to the bottom. Absolutely a race to the bottom, which actually takes away any value that you can get out of some of these projects. People are competing to deliver projects at the lowest possible price. And one of the challenges that Dame Judith brought out was the concept of value engineering. In many cases it wasn't about value, in many cases it wasn't about engineering, it was just about sheer cost cutting. So, some research that was undertaken, let's go away from those headlines then of Grenfell and Hackett. Evidence of a really underlying problem, which is illustrated by some research here from Hickton, who are an independent inspection company. And, it's pretty damning, the endemic issue of poor quality in some of our works. And when I come down to the last point, we get defects ranging from fairly minor issues, such as a broken shower door, to missing fire protection. And those were issues that applied in Edinburgh schools and Lakehall House. Let's have another look at the race to the bottom. Now, Paul showed you some pictures of work. Let's show you some others. Now, yeah, you look at that and you think that's terrible, but actually someone's built it, someone's supervised it, someone's inspected it, and then someone's probably sold the house that had that as part of their wall. Someone's made it, someone's inspected it, and someone's decided that's satisfactory. Now, this is a brilliant one. Now, you may think, well, so what? But if it's your sink and you can't actually plug the plug into the plug hole, you have to ask yourself, what sort of idiot did that? And someone's been paid to do that, and someone's been paid to say that's okay. Someone's inspected the property, and someone probably signed it off with the mortgage. But it's not right. And if you can't get little things like that right, what does it say about the big things? And there's another one. An absolutely useless keyhole. Now, again, who thought they were doing a good job doing that? Again. And I love this one. I love this one. But I think what these pictures tell a story is, though, that and particularly this last one, is that the person who carried the work out just didn't care. And there's a lot of people in the system who don't seem to care. So as chief executive of the CIOB, I think you think, well, my words, we need to do something different. And this isn't just about people who do the job, though, because this actually goes a lot higher up, because there are people in the supervisory and management chain all the way up through the high-level professionals to the client who've actually said, well, this is okay, we don't worry. And when I come down to professionalism, I come back to a document we did on modern slavery last June. And again, there was something that came out within the work about labour exploitation, which I think reconfirms what Dame Judith Hackett was saying. And here, you know, this dispute resolution professional was saying we've trained a generation of young people in the industry to think beating up subcontractors is the way business should be done. It's shameful. It's drive down. It's cost. At the expense of actually trying to get a decent job. And when you drive things down like that, you demotivate, and you're actually creating the recipe for things to go wrong all the way up. But that culture has to start somewhere. And my view is that culture, and the culture change should start with the client. And it really does question what we mean by professionalism. You've been good at your job at all levels. So let me now move on to the Construction Quality Commission, because that's all background really as to what it is that says why we're doing this. So in June 2017, the CIOB announced that we were setting up this commission of past presidents. Noble people, probably able to call people to account because of where they've been and what they've done, and look at that. Focusing on the need to establish and promote a culture of quality. In a little bit of a way that we seem to have been successful at promoting a culture of safety. You know, maybe, you know, the culture of safety we've created has been at the expense of a culture of quality, because you focus on one thing so much, you lose focus on another. But that was really what we wanted to do. But we really wanted to see how we could do to get pride back in what we do, in our buildings and in our infrastructure. And central was to understand the behaviours, why people do things. Why did people sort of put a pipe over a plug socket? And someone say, well, actually, we're putting this pipe in the wrong place. Simple terms of reference: improving the quality of the people, the processes, get that quality culture in place, instill quality in the education process. I feel that has left what we teach people now. We needed to get that back in, and certainly one of the outcomes from the work we're doing is to make sure that quality, what quality means, and the impact quality has, will be a key part of the education framework that CIOB will be asking all our accredited institutions to be working on. I think the government has a big part to play in it, because often when you're getting publicly funding, then the driver there is cost and time. And I think, you know, one of the issues I come across a lot is when decisions are being made by politicians, it's about having things done, because that's what looks good. I remember a politician, you know, in a place like Warrington, where I asked him, he had a big vision being the leader of the council. He said no. And I said, and what do you prefer, to see people develop or things being built? He says, oh, I like things being built. You know, people can vote when you've built a community centre. They can't vote if you've trained a load of people to do a job. And sometimes, you know, we're driven to build things because politicians want them built, and it is, never mind the quality, sort of feel the width. And that's often a problem. So this is where I think government and government clients in particular have a bigger role to play. And then there is the constraints we have, and we've heard it all already today about the issues around people, training, skills availability. And I have to say, I sometimes think that if we had more women in the construction industry, none of them would allow some of the stuff we've seen to go on, because, you know, who would allow that to happen? Certainly my wife wouldn't, and my mum wouldn't. I'm sure some of your mums wouldn't allow that to happen. So there we go. So trying to understand the issues, we did a fair bit of work looking at, firstly, a reality check, see what's happening overseas, and actually learning from other sectors. the reality check. We did a call for evidence, asked people to give their views, give us examples of where they felt things were going wrong. And we set up a website and people could submit all sorts of stuff to it. And particularly we were looking at the management of quality and specifically supervision, sign-off and workmanship. Now, as the professional body for management in the construction industry, we felt particularly responsible because actually it was a big part of what we were doing, or if you like, the professional management and supervision side was failing in because we were seeing examples of these things not being done. And if we looked at a few things, here's some responses came back from people in terms of from this call for evidence. First, do you believe that current management and quality is adequate in terms of supervision? A resounding no. Do you think it's good enough in terms of sign-off? A resounding no. And do you think it's good in terms of workmanship? No. But we accept it. No one is fighting hard to say we're doing things well in the industry. Regulations, codes and standards. Well, let's move on to this one. This was a little bit more interesting because a chunk said, yeah, the codes and standards seem to be okay, but a large chunk said no. And then when we come around to education, and something which I think will affect a lot of you, the view is, the answer is no, we're not educating properly. And that the certification schemes that are around and the qualifications, are they fit for purpose? A small majority saying no, some not knowing, and about a quarter saying yes. And I think we need to bear that in mind when we start putting certifications in. Or are we talking about certifying companies and organisations, or are we talking about it actually about individual certifications and what people can do? And if I go through the key points on the call for evidence, and I won't dally too long on this, I'll put these points up as we go through and pick out a couple of what I think fairly important ones. I think the one that stands out and comes out across more than ever when you talk to people is the demise of the role of the clerk of works. Someone who was out there actually being the conscience in saying, no, this is not good enough, get it done again. You can't proceed until you've dealt with this, because we don't have time now for that level of inspection, that level of rigour, and actually dealing with the consequences of someone like a clerk of works saying, no, you don't go to the next point until you've done this. Cost seems to be the main decider. Pride and profession have taken a back seat. Make it personal, generate, a culture of pride. That's what we need to do. And of course, corporate culture is the starting point. If you don't get it right at the top, it's not going to work all the way down the bottom. Now, just to give you an idea of some of the desktop research we did, here's a quality heat map, and you can see where regulation takes over at the red end, and where it's pretty laissez-faire, and you can see the middle of Africa and Syria, Iraq, and some places like they just do what they want to do, which probably explains why when they have a natural disaster, everything comes tumbling down. And the only place that seems to represent a culture of quality is the Nordic countries. And the rest of us are somewhere in between. When we looked at other sectors, it was quite broad, because I think there's always a lot to learn. The notion that construction is unique and everything we build is a one-off, I don't think carries any weight, because 90% of the processes we use in construction, we use time and time and time again. It's just the end product is different. But, designing, mechanical and electrical systems is a process which we do every time. Doing foundations is a process for different. The detail of it may be different, but we actually know, what the process is and what takes place. And so with these organisations, I always think, when you look at, so the A380, something that can take 500 people, 12,000 miles, in 24 hours at 500 miles an hour. It's got everything in it that a building has got. It goes 500 miles an hour. That's pretty special. I mean, our buildings don't move. You have 500 people in it, and we still leak on them. Still things don't work. Anyway. So the evidence gathering came through all these areas, the reality check, the learning from overseas, and the other sectors. And what came out of it? Education, training and knowledge, legislation, codes and standards, inspection sign-off, things that we already knew from the work we'd done in our area. And we needed a joined-up approach across all the major industry bodies. It's needed to get this quality sorted. So next steps for us. Wanted to create a quality code. Let's see if we could codify some of these things. Rather than have things in many different diverse areas, let's try and bring it together, capture best practice, and set standards to be expected by the industry. Expected from the industry, not by the industry. Let's be a bit more ambitious. Look at competence-based quality certification at individual level, not at a company level, at individual level. Can people do this stuff? Do they have the attributes? Do they have the knowledge? Do they have experience? And put it into our education framework. And that was exactly what the conclusions were that came out from Hackett last year, is that we needed to increase the competency and have evidence of competency in the construction industry. I think she was very concerned that we had a whole load of people that had strings of letters after their name, but there was no actual evidence that they were competent in anything they actually did. And just because you were chartered at something didn't mean to say you could cover anything possible in that particular range. In my spare time, I'm a flying instructor, and as part of that job, I'm also an examiner for the CAA. And last June, I had a call from someone to say, "Look, I've got a pilot. His rating's expired on single-engine planes. Can you do a test and renew it for him?" And I went down, I did the test, and when we did the test, he handed over his license, and I wrote the rating on his license, and I put single-engine piston, very good. And the line above on his license said Boeing 777-300. He was competent to fly jets, but he wasn't competent to fly single-engine aeroplanes. The aviation industry, make sure people are competent to do exactly what it is they have to do, not just give a general competence, say you've got an airline pilot's license, and say you can fly anything. They have to prove their competency. And I think that was one of the points that Hackett was making, is that you need to demonstrate competency. If you're doing high-rise buildings or high-risk buildings, you prove you're competent at that. If you're doing houses, you should prove your competence at that. That's going to be quite revolutionary. But coming back to our quality code, we defined a quality pyramid. You have access to all these slides, so if I whiz through these too quick and you don't have time to gather it down, Martin will make everything available to you. And we came up with the quality drivers honeycomb. Issues, the barriers, the disruptions. We've seen this again earlier from Paul as well. The issues are the same. It doesn't matter where you come into this thing in the construction industry. We have the same issues affecting everything. And what we want with this honeycomb is taking apart the various bits that affect how we actually, or the things that stop us doing the job that we need to do. And try and define through this little process map really how we deal with that. Let's look at the drivers in detail. Nothing unusual there, I think. But the one I think also needs to be highlighted there is corporate behaviour. Good firms do good things, bad firms do bad things, and the outcomes are pretty clear. So let's have a look at the quality driver honeycomb. So let's look at design as an example. You've got the issues, the barriers, the disruptors, the enablers, what makes it possible to happen on design, things that reduce, things that enhance, and then the actions. And we end up with this smart code. Going back to our quality code, what we're hoping will provide is a single point reference, a guide for on-site and other training, examples of best practice, and I think within that would be examples of shameful practice as well, because I think you have to show what's bad, because sometimes I'm not sure people know what bad is. Map of the drivers, and so on. And as I say, the issues about information with pictures and examples. Now, the quality code is under consultation at the moment, and you can actually go to the CIOB website and give your input into the code. And I would say as students, go along and look at it. I think you have a valuable contribution to make. And those of you from the industry, please go along and put your tuppence within as well, because I think it's really important that we get as many people making their observations about what the code is, because from students, if it's not understandable to you, just say it's not understandable, because I think that's a very important part of the consultation process. You know, this has got to be workable and usable by people at all levels of the industry. What we've done in terms of quality course, well, we've used our CIOB Academy to put some programs in place. This is particularly aimed at practitioners. I have to say the take-up on the course has been very good, and the response to the course has been very good, because sometimes, you know, you just need some help to actually remind yourself actually what you do know and what you should go and what you should be doing. And the other thing is we're looking to produce a certification, and we're going to use the same framework we've used in the conservation certification scheme as well. So registered level, basic awareness, the proficient level, and so on, up to a level which would be more applicable to chartered professionals, and saying that you really need to be at the front end of being able to show leadership in quality, you know, and just don't hide behind what your client says. And this will be being launched in July this year. Then, building in the quality initiative, this is a collaborative effort. We've been working with REBA and the RICS, and this was published last year. And again, working alongside the work that Dame Judith Hackett is doing, looking at the chain of custody to show that everything works through the design phase through to the construction phase. And then building on from Hackett again, the building safety program, and again, this has been published by the government, all interlinks about making sure that we actually deliver the things that are actually wanted and are specified. So coming back to why does quality matter? You know, firstly, you know, it matters in economy and society. We are part of the economy, we are part of society. When we get it wrong, it affects people's lives. And sometimes it's a bit more about doing things right, it's about doing the right things. You know, we have seen the tragic consequences of mucking it up. It's everyone's responsibility. And if I can just go a little bit further, I mean, you know, take Carillion as an exercise as a lack of quality. It wasn't a great business. What they were doing wasn't great. And the impact of things that they've had a hand in and not been able to deliver have a massive impact. So, for example, the two hospitals, one in Liverpool, one in the Midlands, that are going to be 3 to 5 years late now because the hiatus since Carillion went will probably cost the lives of more people than had died in Grenfell Tower. Will impact on the quality of life of people because they not get their treatment or they could even die. So the things we do actually really are that important. And sometimes we need to take ourselves away from what the task is and the job is we're doing to remind ourselves what it's doing back in the society and the economy as a whole. You know, too often, you know, we see we're looking for profit over quality, or trying to avoid cost over quality. But at the end of the day, the cost of not getting things right is phenomenal, in the cost of rework. And if we could actually make the quality work, then we'd make so much more difference. We'd have more productivity in the construction industry for a start, because the time taken in repeating work is actually time lost. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for me, and I think questions will be appearing at the end. So thank you very much.